Well, hello there. I am excited about bringing another topic to you today. It's going to start here in about 30 seconds or so, just to give more folks an opportunity to join us. So bear with me for just about 30 seconds to get things going here. All right. In the meantime, I'm going to share my screen. Okay. All right. Well, it is exactly 10:30 a.m. and I am really glad to have you guys join me today to talk on something that really has been around for a while, but something that I wanted to really kind of have an open and honest conversation about this morning. This whole idea of safety culture. And there's a method to my madness, and there's a reason for the picture that you see on your screen in front of you, as well as you can see some Russian writing. And it says in Russian, Chernobyl, which is, of course, most of you who have had an opportunity to watch the recent HBO, you saw the Chernobyl special that HBO ran, which was actually done pretty well. You're familiar with what I'm talking about. Now, the reason I have the picture on the background there is because of the fact that of the origin of the term safety culture, and we'll discuss that in just a second. Back in 1986, I was 12 years old and happened to live at the time only 6 hours away from the epicenter of this particular disaster. I was born in the former Soviet Union and lived only 6 hours driving from there. Chernobyl disaster, as most of you are well aware, was a nuclear disaster at their number 4 reactor in the Chernobyl nuclear power plant outside of Kiev, just about an hour outside of Kiev, which is the capital city in Ukraine. It's considered the worst nuclear disaster in history, both in terms of cost and casualties, and it's one of only 2 nuclear energy accidents at 7, which is the maximum severity on the International Nuclear Events Scale. The other one, of course, being the 2011 Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster in Japan. Now, without going into all the details, most of you probably are aware, this is the disaster that is still in the process of being cleaned up. In fact, though it happened in 1986, the full cleanup is not going to occur until, are you ready for this? 2065. So it's a 79-year cleanup plan and mitigation plan. And it has already cost over $70 billion US. And they're telling how much more it's going to be as we still have 44 more years of cleanup coming up. And so that's kind of where we started talking about. In fact, that's where the term originated. But the reason I titled our conversation today as is it a real thing, safety culture, or is it fake news, is because I wanted to kind of, if we talk about it honestly, and as you do a little bit of on the internet, just a quick search on the internet, what you find pretty quickly is that some folks think that the whole idea of safety culture, the whole concept of safety culture, some call it overly simplistic. Others say that it's a contentious and confused notion. Others opine that it's a vague and globalizing concept. It's basically like throwing a whole lot of things into one concept. Others call it imprecise and conceptually fuzzy. Yet another way that this whole idea of safety culture has been referred to as notoriously nebulous. It's a lazy catch-all term, and others say that it's a consultant's way to make money selling easy fixes. Well, let me tell you something from the very get-go. That's not what this is all about. We're going to have an honest conversation as we move forward, and I just wanted to make sure that we were all clear on that. Now, again, as I mentioned a couple of seconds ago, just a quick synopsis or a quick review of where this whole concept came from. Safety culture as a concept originated back, believe it or not, in 1986 when the International Nuclear Safety Advisory Group, you can see on your screen on the bottom right, that INSAG 7, right? That's a report by the International Nuclear Safety Advisory Group that is a report from the Chernobyl disaster there in Russia or in Ukraine. And in that report, safety culture appeared one of the first times sort of in our known history. And it was blamed as a cause, one of the causes for this incident. Russians were very honest in their post reports, various meetings and other relations that came out of that. And the two things that were blamed for that event were, of course, the lack of safety culture, as INSAG reports, as well as design features. There were some terrible design flaws as to this particular reactor that relied too heavily on the human involvement. There were not enough systems in place, not enough controls in place to prevent some of these things. And a combination of that and a very inexperienced personnel on duty at the time of the event, and I won't go into details, you probably know much better than I do all the ins and outs, but that is sort of a combination of factors that led to this particular event. Now, there are other things on the screen in front of you, and so you have obviously Piper Alpha incident is one of the other pictures that you see, and that is an event that was also had a reference of safety culture in regard to it. Of course, BP Texas City refinery explosion, which is kind of front and center there on the screen, as well as Deepwater Horizon with a $150 billion price tag, and that number is still changing, are a couple of others. And of course, the examples continue. These are not the only incidents that have safety culture as one of the references that was made to. There is a broken safety culture that was reported as a result of the two NASA disasters with Columbia and of course in the other. And so again, this is just a small representation of this, but just to kind of give you an idea of where the origin of that. So before we talk about, look a little bit further into what safety culture is. And by the way, let me give you a little bit of my background. Where am I coming from? I come both from an academic, having spent probably 25 years looking into these areas, into human behavior and kind of researching from academic perspective, but also having a decade of experience as a practitioner, right? Having implemented some of these things and having seen some really amazing results as a result of that. So coming from both academic and practical experience, and that's where I'm coming from this. So what is safety culture? Before we talk about what it is, maybe, how about we go back and talk about what it's not? It's not a destination, right? Lots of our organizations are going to talk about, goal zero or target zero. And it's a good target, 0 incidents, 0 accidents, and those kinds of things. But a lot of times those kinds of targets have very much of a sense to them of this is where we're going, and once we get there, what's next? And of course, ADCO, a company that I'm going to refer to in just a moment, is a really perfect example of that. So it's not a destination. It's not a quick fix. In fact, there's not a set formula that says if you follow steps A, B, and C, you're sure to get results 1, 2, and 3. In fact, talking about not a quick fix, I am certainly not one of those consultants that is selling quick fixes, right? I'm not one of those consultants that says that in a matter of week or in a matter of these 3 questionnaires, I can ascertain your corporate culture and I can help you change it. I've been in organizations that have done that, and it's kind of funny because one of my most recent experiences, it was in a large multinational global company, and we brought in these high-powered culture consultants, right, to do a culture assessment. And after their lengthy and very expensive assessment and everything else that they'd done, all the training and everything, our group that I was part of basically fell apart as far as our senior leadership was concerned. So that was a really powerful example for me of just inadequate understanding sometimes, and the fact that culture is not something that's palpable sometimes. And that's a whole other topic for another time that we can talk about. So the other thing that it's not uniform. I cannot tell you sitting here and say, from my screen right here, from where I sit, if you follow these, then it's gonna, you are sure to get success, because every company has its own expectations. Every company has its own explicit, but then implicit things, right, that are going on. And so there's no uniform formula. There's no uniform solution. And so it's not that. That's not what safety culture is all about. What is it? Well, I mean, there are lots of different ways that it's been defined. And by the way, I am purposely, for the sake of what we're getting through here, I am going to purposely stay away from giving you a clean, clear-cut definition of safety culture. Why am I doing that? Well, because, as I mentioned, of the things that it's not, the whole culture idea, it's very difficult to truly, fully put your finger on it. And so there's not a clear clear-cut definition, but I'm going to tell you what it has to do with. Certainly, safety culture has to do with values, and that's what you see on the screen there. It has to do with attitudes, and it has to do with beliefs. And so over the next few minutes, what I'm going to tell you, rather than giving you a set of 1, 2, 3, follow this, and you're going to achieve safety culture, I'm going to tell you what organizations that have accomplished some real gains in terms of their people's mentality, in terms of their risk awareness, in terms of their successful risk management. I'm going to tell you some of the things that they have in common. And that's what I'm going to give you. And that's about as far as I'm going to go. I'm going to just sort of whet your appetite with some things that you can absolutely not have a quote unquote safety culture without, right? So first of all, the picture C-suite. You can absolutely not have any movement, any positive movement in terms of a safety culture without an absolute commitment from your C-suite, right? It has to be upheld. I have unfortunately worked in organizations where I was being hired to improve, to move the needle, right, on the safety culture, but it was a constant and continual struggle against the C-suite, where explicitly they were saying, hey, this is great and this is what we want. But implicitly, they were submarine, they were torpedoing every single step of the way, every single progress I had made in that. And so it is really kind of a losing battle, because really the employees around, especially those that have been around for a while and they're watching, I'm going to tell you something. They're going to see the implicit a lot quicker and a lot faster than the explicit messaging. So it's got to have a absolute buy-in from C-suite. Very, very important. Back to what we said a second ago. What can you not have safety culture without? You can absolutely not have any movement or any positive development in terms of safety culture without a clear understanding that it's a journey. It's not a destination. Okay. And even if we get to some amazing number when it comes to our total recordable incident rate or EMOD or whatever other rates we're looking at, the lost time incident rate, whatever it is that we're looking at as far as some sort of an indicator of where we are, even when we get to that wonderful 0 point whatever, right? number, that target, that KPI, even at that point, we have to have a constructive dissatisfaction with where we are. We have to be constantly weary of our progress and of what's around the corner, what can happen next. So it's a journey with a healthy awareness that right around the next corner, we can really trip up and we can have a major event. That's very important. You can absolutely not have safety culture, in my experience as well, in a place that has competing priorities, right? If you ever have a drawdown, if you will, between production and safety, if you ever have some sort of a conflict between production and safety, which one overcomes, right? Which one wins out? And that's kind of the next one, is who wins the showdown, right? Safety or production? There has to be a clarity in that, because above and beyond everything else that you may be doing, every time there's a showdown, if production wins every time, that communicates an implicit message, right? That communicates a message that says that really, when push comes to shove, really, when it really matters, it's get her done mentality. It's get it done at any cost, right? And that, by the way, there's absolutely nothing that will destroy any kind of positive movement when it comes to safety culture any faster than this victory for the production anytime there's a showdown. So there has to be an unequivocal commitment and a one priority, and that is the safe operation, which, by the way, interestingly enough, it's not really, if you think about it, it's not really a showdown, because whenever you choose safety, ultimately you choose production as well. You choose profitability as well, because historically and statistically, some of the safest companies out there, some of the companies that have the best risk awareness and management practices out there, also happen to be the most productive, also happen to be the most profitable companies. The two are very connected, and it's important for us to see that, I think. The other thing that I have not seen a safety culture out there without a consistent, constant, continual communication, right? Communicate. Regular facility-wide communication. The targets that you're putting for yourself, the KPIs that you have, the goals that you have in terms of where you're going with the safety culture. It cannot be something that you just keep a well-hidden secret. It cannot be something that you're just communicating to the C-suite to get their buy-in, and that's what you're. It has to be something that goes around the whole company. Every single employee has to know, hey, this is what's going on. Hey, this is where our company sees itself. And so, we talk about, let's say you have an OSHA inspection, right? An OSHA inspector. One of the important things in having an OSHA inspector, in the OSHA inspection on a facility, is a knowledgeable, your employees that he or she asks questions are knowledgeable about what's going on. Well, it's the same thing here. Everybody has to buy in and understand where you're going. And that, of course, happens through communication. Past performance, I think an improving and increasing and a growing safety culture has this idea that past performance is a guarantee of future success, right? I have Abu Dhabi company for onshore oil operations. It's kind of the background there. And the reason I do is because if you haven't seen their video, I challenge you, as soon as this is over, go to YouTube and look up ADCO H2S video. That's what you just put that in or you can even go to Google and put ADCO H2S video and it'll pop up. And the thing that's interesting, and by the way, the video is such a high quality. It won some film festival. I believe it was in New York State or something of that nature. Really, really good, high quality video. But the main message there is, here's a company that finally arrived, back to what we were talking about a second ago, the competency, they've arrived at that whatever destination they were going for as far as safety culture. They had millions, and I can't remember how many million, but they had millions of incident-free hours, right? Millions of hours without any recordable incidents or anything like that. So really kind of at the apex of that. And having arrived there, just sort of allow them to think that they're there and let their guard down. And they had a multiple, I believe it was a 5-person incident. And I won't really steal, I won't give you the do the spoiler here, but watch the video. It's very, very interesting. And the video is what they produce in retrospect as far as examining sort of their own journey. And it was very, very helpful, and I think very, very interesting. So past performance, if you want to really move the needle on safety culture, cannot be sort of a, patting yourself and saying, we've arrived, we're there, and we can kind of let our guard down. Absolutely not. The other important, I think, factor in kind of moving the needle in safety culture or in seeing some positive improvement when it comes to safety culture in your company is where your safety leaders, but also your supervisors, your current managers are spending time where the people are. I have this maxim that I've gone by, and it's it goes, you have to inspect what you expect, right? You must inspect what you expect. And that's very, very important. And so statistics and history tell us that productivity, but also attention to risk management improves where line employees, frontline employees, shop level employees are seeing their supervisor walking among them and sort of participating and caring, striking up. I mean, you have no idea. You can place a safety professional, on shop level, having safety conversations all day long, but it doesn't get anywhere in comparison to a line manager striking up a safety conversation with an employee. The importance and the amount of progress that accomplishes just just a short safety conversation by someone's job does not have health, safety, environment, right? Super important, really a huge deal there. Couple of other things, just understanding, some basic understanding of what people are like, right, is what will kind of help you as far as moving the safety culture needle forward. Understanding that people are fallible. And so when you understand that people are fallible, you understand that, hey, even the best of us make mistakes, right? Human nature is to be imprecise, is to err. When you understand that, you will understand that error will happen. It's unavoidable and inevitable. You can never fully eliminate all human error, right? The amount of counseling, training, motivation can alter that. When we have an incident and what do? We shame, right? We retrain and all of that sort of thing. How is that helpful? How helpful has it been for you in the past? How successful have you been with that? But maybe understanding how and why unsafe acts occur, understanding that it takes more than one individual who happens to be at the active edge, right, at the sort of the sharp edge of the organization. And he or she may have been just the last straw, right? And there were many other latent errors or latent events and participants that led to that. Very, very important. And really kind of understanding some basics of, what happens, what leads to an error. Well, when the limits of human capabilities are close to being exceeded, that's what increases the likelihood of human error. What are some of the things that exceed the limits, or what are some of the things that exacerbate the limits of human capabilities? Well, fatigue does, right? I have lots of friends that are currently in the data center industry, and I'm going to tell you something. When it comes to data center industry, over the last year, the COVID pandemic around the globe and everything has driven us to do many more things online, and that has really just increased the load of folks in data center industry humongously. But you combine that with the decrease in the number of resources that were being utilized in order to, human distance and in order to decrease the risk of infection and so on and so forth. And that has created a tremendous amount of fatigue. That has created a tremendous amount of tiredness, exhaustion, people running all kinds of operations. I live in the state of Texas, and in the state of Texas today, again, also I think somewhat related to COVID. For example, our Department of Corrections is experiencing that in an insane amount right now. I have individuals that I've talked to that work for the Department of Corrections here in the state of Texas, and they tell me about having to work 15-hour shifts. That, my friends, exceeds the limits of human capabilities. And what does it do? It increases the likelihood of human error. Loss of situational awareness will do the same thing. Stress will do it. Memory lapses, significant impairment, like when you are working sick, when you come to work and while you're sick because you don't want to lose your job, right? That some folks refer to it as presenteeism, right? Being at work but not being fully engaged. Limited attention resources. When you have personal worries, when you have stuff going on at home, when you have relatives perhaps that are dealing with COVID, or maybe you have some exciting things going on that are still nevertheless occupying your mind. And so your attention resources are limited to where you place yourself, or you are placed in a critical environment situation, in a critical decision-making situation. All of a sudden, you're making a bad decision. Not because you were trying to, not because you intended to make an error, but because you just were, your capabilities were way over exceeded. And so that's important as well. Also, just understanding what it takes to have an event, to have an incident, right? James Reason, Dr. Reason's Swiss cheese analysis is just a good example of that. Understanding the error likely situations, what they are, understanding that it's not just that last person that caused active error or caused the active action that resulted in an incident, but there are other factors. They're systemic, they're supervisory factors, they're what I talked about, home factors outside of the work. And so just understanding that these kinds of things are predictable, they're manageable and preventable. And so if you understand that humans are fallible and they're going to make mistakes, how about we put controls in place? How about we put safeguards in place that will take that inevitable, once in a while, the error is going to happen, and manage how bad it is, manage its repercussions, manage it to where it doesn't develop into full-blown unwanted event, but it ends up being a near miss, or it ends up being something much less than that. And so that's very, very important there. And as I've already mentioned, kind of having a system approach to looking. You cannot have a safety culture without having more of a systematic approach where every person at every level of organization views themselves. I am responsible for my own safety and the safety of others. I am my brother's keeper, right? Safety is not just Simon's responsibility. Safety is not just our QHSE person's responsibility. Safety is not just our risk management people's responsibility. Safety is my responsibility and your responsibility. It is everyone's responsibility. And when we all view it that way, that's when we're starting to make strides towards a positive safety culture, right? You cannot absolutely have any kind of positive safety culture without also having reporting culture, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But if you want to have a reporting culture, you got to provide mechanisms for identification of weaknesses and assurance of adequate controls. Okay, you got to provide ways for people to report, and you've got to integrate safety into management and work processes at all levels. And we've kind of talked about that. Learning and improvement, huge deal. It has to be continuous and nonstop. But by the way, let me tell you something. Learning and improvement is contingent or hinges on your ability to learn, right, from your incidents. Are you doing the proper root cause analysis? Are you looking at all the root or all the causes of your incidents? Or are you just blaming the person? Are you just blaming, shaming, and retraining, right? If you're just blaming, shaming, and retraining, you have no learning from the past events. You have no learning not just from the past events, but from the near misses. If you don't have a reporting culture, and there's one other factor that must be in place to have a reporting culture. And if you don't have that, then you don't have the mechanism for learning. You cannot learn from the best resource of learning, and that is the near misses and the unsafe events or acts that the employees are reporting on their own, right? If you don't have that, you're not learning. You're just sitting there waiting on dumb luck and maybe hoping that nothing's going to happen to you and not ever having a clue when the next thing happens. Speaking of, we're talking about safe culture and reporting culture. Remember I said just a second ago, you've got to have one other element, and that's just culture. What's that all about? Boy, we can talk about that. Sidney Decker has done a lot of work and even has a book by this title, several others. Good stuff. I highly recommend for you to check it out. But in the meantime, what is just culture? In case you're not familiar with the concept. Well, very simply, it's a place that's not a blaming culture. Remember I said blame, shame, retrain? Yeah, it's not a blame culture. Anytime there's an event, an employee knows that they're not just going to be blamed for it, shamed and retrained, or even worse, blamed and fired, right? That's the way we handled for a while, especially in the 80s. We found very easily, or maybe it shouldn't be that surprising, that the events still continued happening. Even when we fired, quote unquote, the bad apples, the events continue to happen. That certainly is not, it had nothing to do with the bad apples. Of course, now we know it was more systemic failures. There were lack of controls, Piper Alpha, lack of lockout tagout procedures. That's a perfect example there. Lack of more systemic controls in place. But you've got to have just culture. And what is just culture? Not a blaming culture. Now, just culture doesn't mean that anything goes, right? But it also means that employees feel there's a level of psychological safety. They feel safe to self-report. Remember we talked about a second ago? That the only way you can accomplish any kind of movement in safe culture is if you're learning from events that maybe were near misses or maybe they're whoopses that never really had terrible consequences. Well, those are going to be stuffed down. Those are going to be hidden. If you don't have a culture where employees know they're not going to be fired, they're not going to be, they're not going to be blamed for it. Of course, there has to be some level of responsibility, and there is that. But there has to be the right balance, right? Where employees feel safe to be able to report there. There has to be some level of anonymity. I'm not talking about complete anonymity. And again, this is kind of outside of the scope of what we're talking about here, but I'm talking about some level of protection for your employees to where they feel comfortable with reporting, with self-reporting. Because now all of a sudden you have this incredible inflow of information and you're able to learn, you're able to see where the edge is, right? You're able to know where you need to put controls, what kind of controls work, and boom, you've just protected yourself that much more. And so that's very, very important. Positive reinforcement of proactive management of risk, that's important. And that goes a long way. And I really don't have to spend a whole lot of time here. I think that's pretty clear, that if all you're seeing is doing is zapping people, you're being the safety police, then people are going to do just that. They're going to scatter anytime you show up and not going to have any kind of relationship or any kind of conversation with you. But if they're seeing you showcasing of a positive, proactive management of risk and reinforcing that in positive ways, and it doesn't necessarily have to be monetary. There are lots of ways that I've seen that done. It could be with a special parking spot. It can be a recognition in the monthly newsletter or whatever it is. There are a gazillion and half ways. Maybe an ability for the employee to choose to have first dibs at a day off or schedule or whatever it is. There are lots of different ways to do that, but that is very, very, very important. Obviously, we've already mentioned nothing is swept under the rug. If you're sweeping stuff under the rug, you're hiding information. If you're hiding information, you're not able to learn from it, which means you're going to get, sooner or later, stuff is going to happen, and you're not going to be able to prevent it because you have not learned from all the leading things, especially talking about Heinrich Triangle, if you know what I'm talking about there. And by the way, when you have that mentality, and speaking of, as we're talking about safety culture, or sort of a positive movement, more of a safer culture, does not view or does not believe there's such a thing as a routine task, right? Every task presents with it a possible opportunity for something bad to happen. And so while safety culture may not be a homogeneous set of values, beliefs, and behaviors concerning safety at all the levels, especially of a large organization, in practice, these practices and these principles that we talked about are things that are going to really help you to move the needle in that. And so what is the big deal about it? As we talked about, why is that a big deal? Why would you as a C-suite executive or why would you as someone that is at the top of the organization is really important? Why would you embrace that? Why would you want to embrace that? Or you're sitting there and thinking, why do I want safety culture? Stuff is working for me the way that it is. Why do I want that? Well, I'm going to tell you why. Because corporate commitment to employee well-being inadvertently and consistently sees high job satisfaction, right? And I'm going to tell you something. When your employees are engaged, by the way, engaged employees make safer employees. It's really strange how it's really connected there. And when the employees have a higher job satisfaction, they're gonna be a lot more productive, and they're gonna be a lot more open. They're gonna be a lot more willing to do what needs to be done. They're gonna be a lot more willing to put in their heart and soul for you. And so that's very, very important. But also talking about just very specifically dollars and cents, guess what? When your employees have higher job satisfaction, you have high workforce retention. What does that mean? That means you're not constantly spending money on recruiting, on searching, on hiring new employees, on training, onboarding, and all the costs that go into that. You're not wasting money on that because your workforce retention is pretty incredible. And so that's a big deal. Obviously, safer employees you have as a result of that. And what is a cool part about that? Higher profitability. You're not spending money on cleaning up. You're not spending money on fixing. You're not spending money on regulatory fines and lawsuits. But the biggest thing, and probably one of the hardest things to put your finger on, is reputational damage. You're not trying to constantly fix a reputational damage. You and I well know, in the corporate world today, in the world in which we live, with the regulations around the globe and with high visibility with social media, if you are known as a company that doesn't care about your employee well-being, number one, you're going to have a really hard time, because employees talk with social media. You're going to have a really hard time finding good employees. And number two, you're going to have a real hard time getting good contracts, because there are going to be people and larger clients that are not even going to want to touch you, right? And so that's a really, really big deal. Now, I want to tell you something. These are just some of the things that we've talked about that are, that are some of the steps. I left this for the very last slide because one of the things that I offer as my help, if you've kind of sat here, listened to it, and you're thinking, man, I'd love to have some of these things. At the very beginning of the presentation, I told you I don't have a fix-all, one formula that works all, and this is certainly not it. But what I do have, and what I can offer you, can I help you out with, is I have a 2-day training course that's Human Factors for Critical Environments. And it's a sort of a deeper dive into human error causes, some of the things that we looked at here, some of the things that we looked at as far as the culture is concerned. And it's really meant to probe, it's really meant to broaden the perspective, challenge thinking, and provide some practical tools and tips. Is that something that in 2 days you're going to fix your whole safety or whole corporate culture? Absolutely not. Is it something that's going to cause you to start thinking along those routes and maybe redirect you, maybe put you on the right track? It certainly can do that. And so if you're interested more about it, you can email me, info@safeguardsoul.com. Phone number on the screen, you can use that as well. And that is something that we can certainly would love to help you out with. I can do that both via Zoom or virtually, really anywhere in the world as far as that is concerned, or those places that are currently open, I can come and do an in-person session, which is really a lot powerful than that. And so that's just something that I provide. I am going to stop sharing my screen here for a second, And what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide just a couple of seconds for any other questions. And I'm going to go back and see some of the comments and sections and questions that I've had before. Someone said that we need awareness of these concepts in the workplace, and I agree 100%. Someone said that competency is very important. Also, understanding the journey by everyone with the support to facilitate the ongoing delivery. I agree with that 100%. I think it's a really good and important factor. Someone also said that good management needs to be able to embrace reporting, not hide from and blame for it. I agree 100%. We cannot get better if we do not embrace, if we do not create the culture and the environment where we are encouraging free information flow. The more information we have, the more opportunities we have to establish controls and to prevent unwanted events from really taking us down. So that's very, very important. Any other questions, any other thoughts, any other comments before I close this out? One of my goals with this was to really stay away from being a full hour long presentation. I wanted to just give you some teasers, just give you some thoughts. And if there are no more questions, no more thoughts, thank you for joining me. Thank you for hanging out. I appreciate your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.